Great. Well, welcome to Let's Talk Leadership and another of our live conversations. Joining us this afternoon, because it is this afternoon in America, is Rick Maurer. He's over in near Washington. Birt is back from Saudi Arabia and is now in Holland. And Tim, one of our dear colleagues, is joining us from Germany. So it's super to see you all this afternoon. As with all of our conversations, if you want to ask anything, if you want to challenge anything, if you want to comment on the conversation, just join us. And the details at the bottom of the screen. Now, Rick did a recorded conversation with us last year, and he stars in our little sort of anniversary review that we put up a couple of weeks ago. So there's a clip of him there, but we've got him live, actually, with us today. He's threatening to play his trombone, but at the moment we've persuaded him not to do that. But if we have to, we have to. But more importantly, he's recently, literally in the last day or two, produced a new book called Seizing the Moments of Possibilities. And Ian's doing the plug there. And so what we want to do is just explore some of the themes in this book, Rick, with you, and really hear it from you. And bearing in mind that all the time what we're trying to do is to support leadership wherever it is. So we'll see if we can link some of the ideas you've come up with, Rick, which are fascinating, having looked through the book, with some of our common themes that are keep recurring. So it's good to see you. Hope all is well in Washington.
It is, yeah.
So just to kick off, Seizing Moments of Possibilities. That sounds a really interesting title to a book. What sort of drove you to that title?
Well, I started to realize a few years ago that there were a lot of really good plans out there for change and projects, but people still complain. So even you can think of the biggest named, most popular way of working on change, and people go, "Oh, I love it." And then you talk to somebody else and they go, "Oh, I hate it." And I go, "All right, so what's the difference here?" And the big difference is, and you may have heard this expression before when I've used it, but it's like all these things, including stuff I've read, should have a little warning sticker on the back that says, "Warning, batteries not included." And so how do we include energy, forward momentum into what we're doing already? And one of the things that gets in the way of change management is it's often thought of as an add-on. Okay, I remember one friend of mine who was in on starting one of the really big change management practices in a big consulting firm. And he said, but they never used this. They would call us and say, "Hey, could you folks come in and, I don't know, people need a break. Could you do one like that Myers-Briggs thing, or could you do some team building thing?" Nothing wrong with team building or Myers-Briggs, but they were off to the side and they were always additional time. Seizing moments of possibility, the idea is think of the most boring meeting you have coming up. Maybe it's this call with me, but maybe something else coming up and going, "God, that's going to be awful." What's something that you could do to begin to infuse energy into that existing meeting or phone call or whatever you're doing? Sorry, it's a long-winded answer to get at that. But.
So in a sense, it's a mindset change. It's looking at it differently and seeing what's there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because I loved your example you gave of 180 degrees. I could imagine having that sort of conversation where your head swivels backwards and forwards every 2 seconds, Yes.
Well, should I tell that example?
Yeah, do.
Okay. I was just starting to use theater improvisation in my work to teach this model of resistance I'd come up with a number of years ago. And so kind of on the spot, I said, look, would everybody think of something that you really feel pretty strongly about? I mean, don't pick abortion. Don't pick something that it's just too hard. And one of the guys was a big baseball fan. And he said his team, the Seattle Mariners, had just traded away Randy Johnson, one of the best pitchers kind of ever. And he was furious about that. And I said, okay, great. So what I want you to do is tell me about that, why it's such a bad idea. And at some point, I'm just going to say switch. And I'd like you to switch your point of view 180 degrees. And then at random, I'm just going to say switch again. And each time I would say switch, you could almost see steam coming out of his, his head. It was just amazing. And that was just over, something that he follows, just as a fan. And I really got struck by that. So I think of that in when we're trying to influence other people, I'll say, can you step in their shoes? All right, let's just try a quick experiment. And so it's a really simple way to say, can I do that? And man, if I can't do it, I'm going to have a hard time in that meeting with people, So, and it really helps them begin, if I can do it, see the legitimacy in that other point of view.
Yeah.
And that means I might be open to various things.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, last year when the sort of everything went virtual, I started off thinking to myself, this isn't going to work, the stuff traditionally we've done. And then someone said to me, probably sort of August time last year, well, there are some advantages, Matthew. And I thought, well, are there? But then when you switch it and you start to think, well, actually, there are some things. I mean, I've just had a conversation this morning with a client in Norway, and they want to go back to doing some face-to-face work, but they're not sure yet because of the situation in Europe. And we suddenly had a really interesting conversation around, well, we could do bits of it virtually, but we could do a factory tour virtually, so we don't have to fly anywhere to look around the factory. And then maybe we could find a really safe place like Greenland or Iceland to have a face-to-face session where we all meet up safely for a day or two and just have a conversation. And I found myself actually, if I'd had that conversation 9 months ago, I wouldn't have been in the conversation. But now suddenly you start to think, hey, yes, there are all sorts of possibilities.
Yeah.
And it's a much nicer place to be.
That's a great example too. I mean, really practical, real world. Yeah.
Yeah. So what else in the book then, Rick?
That's pretty much it. It's just
we're off to the trombone playing now.
Yeah, thanks. Good talking with you. Well, okay. So the idea of the book, and it's like 70 pages or something. And the idea is, I'm writing it for people leading change. So I actually didn't write it for consultants like us. And I said, all right, so if you are willing to consider this thought of a mindset of blending it in, how do you start? Because the mistake would be you get some consultant like me going, oh, hey, we can have this big 3-day event. We're going to invite 500 people. Everybody's going to be and that could be a great intervention, but that's not a place to start. Especially if I haven't done anything like that before, I'm going to get scared before anything ever happens. So I just start off in the book, and I have these application activities all through it, and I just say, hey, look, the first thing you got to do is observe. We have a famous sports figure here in America, Yogi Berra, who once said, you can observe a lot just by watching. Yeah. And so without your theories in mind, just look at that meeting, especially if somebody else is leading it. It's easier to step back and just notice what's going on with people. Forget about the task right now, but just pay attention to, I notice that whenever Ian speaks, people turn down, they start looking at their phones. Or when or they sit back and they go, wow, tell me more. But you're starting to notice things differently. And then I say, okay, but it really can help to have a lens to look at this stuff. And so, like, I use my lens as an example, but also Ono's, the Ono circle in production things where people just stand I didn't realize this, for hours and observe what's going on in a workstation. And then he'll come by and say, what'd you see? And if he didn't get it right, he'd say, stand there for a few more hours. I mean, so you could use Ono. You could use, there's a thing that the guy, Tony Hesh, the guy who created Zappos, came up with. I mean, whatever, it might be some personality theory, but having a lens, and then don't get too enamored with your lens. If it's not helping you see something, be like a good photographer and pull another lens out and try it out. But so the first couple of chapters are just, how do you observe better? Okay. And then what it gets into is, all right, so how do you safely begin to blend? And the image that I like to use is we need to be like a good barista. We have a coffee shop, which I think I can start going to again. And it used to be, if memory serves me, I would get in line and there would always be somebody ordering a latte. And never once did I hear them say, hey, give me a latte, but hold the milk. Because you can't do that. A latte is a blend of steamed milk and espresso. You can't have a latte without one or the other. And when a barista does it right, you can't tell where the milk ends and the coffee begins. It's just a seamless blend of goodness. I'm a little biased there. That's what our regular meeting on Monday morning, or whatever we're doing, it doesn't need these special events, but how do I blend in really simply? And how do I start there so that it feels safe and comfortable for me and for them? And I'll be glad to give some examples, but
I think you're on mute, Matthew.
It's the best form of Matthew in many days. But, we have to. He was giving us a moment, weren't you, Matthew, for us just to seize the opportunity. To say,
absolutely. Well, it was actually the hidden host who was muting me. He'd obviously had enough of his father talking. The power of technology. But no, we were doing something called the organizational workshop that Birt, Ian, and Tim and I do on a regular basis, and I actually said to one, would they climb up a pair of step ladders at the corner of the room and just observe what is going on? I didn't want them to say anything. I didn't want them to intervene. I didn't want them to shout from the top of the step ladder, but I needed to get them high enough so they could see the whole room and what was happening. And it was fascinating when we'd finished a session of it, because it's in sort of big chunks. I just asked him to not make any comment, not to say what should have happened or what could have happened, but just to observe what he actually saw. And it was a really, really interesting insight into something that the rest of us were all so involved in. We had no way of knowing what was happening. And just having that different view was incredibly important to the conversations that then entailed. And
I love that. Yeah.
Well, it's just, and I was thinking, earlier this week I was doing a face-to-face workshop, the first one in 14 months, because we're now all vaccinated in the UK, so these things are happening. And I was with another colleague. We were observing the same small senior leadership team. She had a completely different view of what was happening to mine. So when we stopped afterwards and reflected, it was like we'd seen two completely different events.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that really helpful when I can get over my own ego to notice something and realize that other person saw something completely different. And, once I can get over, how did I miss that? Or, that person must be wrong. It can be a really enlightening and enriching kind of experience.
Yeah. So how about the rest of us? Any thoughts?
Well, I've actually got a question for Rick, because I was looking at the book this morning. I've read chunks of it, Rick, perhaps not every word, but I'm interested, building on this observation thing of what you talked about with sport, and you mentioned baseball earlier, and I know there's the article from The Atlantic that you reference in the book, which is about the quiet eye and observation. And I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that, and how that can connect to the world of business and leadership, because I think there's some really interesting stuff in there. Super
good, thank you. I wish I could remember the name of the researcher in that, but basically, they found that they did it on baseball, but I mean it would fit any sport that I can think of, and it's the idea that even with all of this stuff happening around you, you're able. The term these days would be mindful, that you're just seeing a lot. And it's that quiet eye that allows us to get that bird's eye view, like you were talking about, Matthew, without ever having to climb up on the ladder. I mean, it's that, look at this. But the more, what happened, well, I'll give you another example out of the book. A researcher named Dr. Debbie Cruz, and she does a lot of work with golfers. And one of the things she studied was putters, putting. That's if you don't follow golf, it means the hole is right there, and all you have to do is kind of tap the ball, or a pretty gentle kind of movement. And she compared those golfers who were pretty consistently good at making putts and those who weren't. And she said the big difference. she said when they showed the experiments, they had these helmets on, and the brain patterns for all the golfers was just a tremendous amount of stuff going on. I'm just all over the place. But she said in those final seconds, when they got up to the ball, everything changed. For the people who weren't so good, the activity is still there. Oh my God, am I going to make it? Why didn't I bring my better club? Oh, the wind's blowing the grass. It's just all this activity. The others, to use that term, Tim, you're talking about, the quiet eye, everything it almost goes blank. Just for those few seconds. They're not thinking about technique. They're just hitting the ball. And the quiet eye is what allows that to happen, and it really is a mindset kind of thing. And in fact, Yogi Berra, the guy I mentioned, his reputation was he was a catcher, which I realize baseball is a pretty American or North American kind of thing. But
I used to play.
Oh, cool. Okay, good. Well, a catcher is catching for the pitcher, and he can see everything, but often isn't paying attention to everything. And Yogi Berra's reputation was he noticed everything going on, or it seemed like he noticed everything. And the only way you can do that is to be calm enough, have that quiet eye, or else you're going, oh, what's going to happen there? And then suddenly you get all obsessed about things that might happen or might not, as opposed to just observing.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I'm really interested in, because observing, you might be, as Matthew was describing as well, you might be observing lots and lots of chaos, lots of things going on simultaneously. Different people may see completely different things and miss the gorilla. We all know the video, of course. Yeah. What I'm interested in is where that goes and the implication for leadership. It's then having your laser focus on doing and completing and performing. That's really the interesting, as I say, outcome, I suppose, of observing, first of all, that it actually leads somewhere, which is this laser focus, which is fascinating.
I'm a little troubled by the word laser focus. I mean, I think we're probably in agreement. I was thinking of a project I was working on before the pandemic, and these people would come in. These were the executives in this organization, and for this weekly meeting to talk about this big reorganization. And you could see as they walked in the room, they were still working on the meetings they had just come from. And before the meeting was over, their minds are somewhere else. I would say they had laser focus, but not on the things that mattered in that room.
Okay.
Right then, and the kind of quiet eye. In fact, I was telling somebody this just the other day. They said, well, how do you do that? I said, all right, imagine, just excuse me a second, that you typically am going to have just a sip of coffee. If I pay attention, if I'm mindful, I can use that couple of seconds just to be calm. And nobody's, I'm not sitting chanting something, with my legs crossed. I'm just having a sip of coffee. But anything that can help us then quiet in and then say, I need to focus on. Bam, ba, 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 ba. And all right, that would be my take on it.
Makes sense.
Okay.
And I think this is particularly important at the moment, because I don't know whether I think we've all noticed it. We do these sort of sessions online with our clients, and however long it runs for, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, that they're going straight into another meeting session or whatever, and trying to help people just quietly reflect on either what they've experienced or what they've heard is very, very difficult. If just as they come off whatever you've been discussing, there's a whole stream of text messages and emails and WhatsApp messages saying, join this meeting, join us now, where are you, what have you been doing, why can't you be here beforehand? And you think that's the sort of world we've been inhabiting. And it's certainly for the last 12, 18 months. And it's not getting better. It's getting more and more frantic. And there are more and more people saying either that they're feeling burnt out, or that they're not as sharp as they were. They're not realizing stuff is happening around them when they should be, or even worse, they're not realizing that other people are struggling and they haven't noticed it. Those sort of things seem to be coming in more and more. But the quiet eye, I just like the concept of it. I just like the whole idea of it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, Tim.
So
I have a question for you, Rick. Sorry, Britt.
Yeah.
I got in there just first, but you're next. Okay, Rick. So Rick, we've known each other for a while now, and I remember you saying a while back that the resistance to change was a big thing in some of your previous work, and you're still consistent with that as a great way to represent. But you really come back to the energy concept, and resistance just is like a weed. It's a flower, but not in the part of the garden that you'd like it to be. So your battery's not included. I guess the scary thing is people are bringing their own batteries, but they're not necessarily for your change. Would that be a fair way of presenting it? Because as you look through into your book content here, you're trying to channel energy because it exists, and people are passionate about something. They have energy for something, but it may not be what you have or what you want. Would that be fair?
I think it's very fair. Yeah. So yeah, I love that image. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, they're coming in with some power pack, but maybe it's connected to the long drive home I have or whatever it might be. But yeah, but it also could be
not as key.
I'm sorry.
Not as key maybe as what you want it to be focused on, and that's that ability to observe where are the sources of energy and then work with what you have. And please forgive me, I'm no martial arts expert, but I believe the martial arts are channeling other people's energy against them, as it were. Not that I say we should channel it against people in terms of change, but if we can use what's there, what exists, wouldn't that be a cool way to make change happen? And ultimately, for the good anyway, that's what we're doing as leaders, just to try and channel that focus in others. Tim, you talk a lot about energy, attention, and emphasis on things. And if it's misaligned, I mean, Britt, the work that we do together, it's just a real struggle, isn't it? Sometimes to get the stars to align, like with a greater purpose.
Yeah. And presumably also what you notice and what part of that book is about, which unfortunately I haven't seen yet, Rick, but I'm sure it's great, is about how that actually obviously the opposite of focus and energy is distraction and dissipation of energy. And I assume that just like negative attitudes, that's contagious. So if you are working with someone or if you're interacting with someone where you notice that energy is either elsewhere or not present or is not flowing, then I think as a sort of it's almost contagious to the sense that you then bear the brunt of each other's distraction and of each other's lack of energy. Does that make sense to you? That sort of energy begets energy in a way?
Say the last sentence again, please.
Energy begets energy, and if there's no energy, it gets depleted from both sides.
Well, I agree with you. The energy begets energy, and the energy working against you can beget energy. So suddenly there can be this force of like, kind of. I think on the energy bar thing that I developed a few years ago, I have a stage on there called grumbling. And the grumbling might be silent, but it's that, oh, God, here we go again. What do they come up with? And it's, and it has an attraction, so it can be. I got to tell you something. I was, when I was in the Army here in the States, I was in the Army band here in Washington, D.C. And so it was a good band. I liked the people I worked with. I was treated well. We did a lot of funerals at Arlington Cemetery, but we also, the group I was in, we played at the White House a lot. And I was in for 3 years, and I was over at the Kennedy Center, our main concert hall. And one of the guys from the band, his part-time gig was he was an usher there. And I said, hey, Dick, how are you doing? How are things in the band? And he said, well, to tell you the truth, Rick, they're a whole lot better since guys like you got out. And he said, and I was, taken aback. And he said, you guys always were complaining. Oh, man, we got to do this. You mean we got another thing this afternoon? We just worked 2 hours this morning. We blah, blah, blah. And I never would have seen myself as one of those people. And that what I was doing, not alone, but there were others too, the impact that had on the people who actually said, wow, I'm really happy to be here. This is a good gig. This is a good thing to be doing. But it was a real eye-opening moment for me. So,
but this energy issue seems to be fundamental to a lot of the things that we observe and the work that we do. I mean, I've just for a client completed a whole lot of assessments, the workplace Big Five assessment from Paradigm, in the States, not too far from you, Rick. And you can pull out part of the data and put it into what I'm going to call like an energy report. It's actually the capacity you have to complete certain tasks, not how good you are at them, but whether it actually floats your boat, whether you actually get excited by doing it and therefore you're energized, and whether at the end of the day you get on the Philadelphia Turnpike and you still feel like shouting at people and you're energized, or whether you get on the Philadelphia Turnpike and think, oh dear, it's been an awful day and the last thing I want is get caught in the traffic. And it's interesting how that a lot of the things that we often ask people to focus on are we believe are the sort of core of leadership, are often the things they find most draining, that that zap their energy very, very quickly. And I'm just fascinated that looking at it from your perspective in terms of energy begets energy, it just seems to keep this short word keeps seeping into absolutely everything that we touch on.
And I agree, and I think it should seep into everything. There's the chapter 5 of the book, I use a simple version of an assessment tool that I created called the Batteries Not Included map. And since you can all just see me, I would just want people to imagine that ideally what would happen on a project, that energy would start to build. Like people go, wow, we got to do something, the why. And then during the planning, there's a lot of activity, a lot of energy, a lot of the energy terms I use, by the way, is right at the beginning is there's a sense of urgency. Yeah. So you can look around and go, do people feel this urgency, or are they going, oh, we've got to do something new? And then in the planning stage is there anticipation? Can you feel that kind of, I don't know, electricity in the room or on the calls or whatever? And then that moves into planning. And that's, by the way, a place where the energy often drops out. And sometimes the planners do all this work. They got excitement. They hand it off. In fact, I was working with some planners one time and I said, what happens when a project gets to that implementation stage? And the guy said, we hand it off. That is not a handoff. And I said, and who are you handing it off to? And they got silent for a minute and they said, that's our problem. We come up with these great ideas and then it dies. And so what you need at that implementation is you need people to feel mastery, the kind of discipline that you would have if you were an athlete or a musician, to really get it right and care about the little things. Because so many meetings I go to, the energy there is like, how do we get through this? I remember one client saying, okay, is this going to be one of those meetings we need to fill in the forms and prioritize a bunch of stuff and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's just, let's do it. Let's get out of here, rather than a sense of what a good athlete would be doing in that same time. And then the fourth stage, which doesn't get talked about a lot, is when you're actually taking all that work and getting value out of it, which you would think would be key. But I remember I was talking to one leader and she said, we do really good in those first 3 areas. And the fourth one, we don't even measure. We measure how well we implement it. Did we come in on time, on budget? Did people get the training? Blah, blah, blah. And so what you need in that final stage, the energy you need, is resolve, the commitment to make a difference. So what I believe you need to do, and this is how I work with my clients, is, all right, let's take a look at a typical pattern for this kind of change in your organization. And what does that little route look like? Like ideally, it would go up and then stay high. Or another one, and what prompted this, is that there's kind of like halfway up, there's just this flat line, kind of horizontal dotted line. And I call that a change on life support. There's just enough energy for people to go to the meetings, but not enough to get much value out of it. As a CEO said to me one time, he said, well, all I got was malicious compliance. Well, and then there's a lot of other variations of the map. What I really find helpful here and hopeful is often when people create that map, I'll go, well, why does the energy go up right there? Oh, because we did da-da-da. Why is it going down right there or stay down? Oh, because. And often it's very specific what they've got. And I'll go, what could you have done? And almost always, honestly, almost always they go, oh, here's what we could have done. So they've got the answer. They just by stepping back and looking at it, they know what's going wrong, and they could say, oh, we should have gotten those people involved earlier. Oh, we should communicate, blah, 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 whatever it is. But it amazed me how often the answer, not only the question, but the answer was right there in front of them. And as a consultant, the best thing I can do then is to shut up and let them talk. So anyway.
You speak, Rick, in the book about hidden in plain sight, and you just triggered another thought in my mind that I used to be a soccer coach and referee, and I was coaching my son's soccer team, and we played a particular tournament where we had more players than we had positions. So what we did is we started experimenting. We put the goalkeeper up front, see if he could score any goals, or we put one of our midfield players into a central defence position. And we actually experimented with the talent that we had, and we discovered, of course, that certain roles that people do in change, for example, may be cooler than others, and everybody wants to play in that position. And it may not be planning, or it may not be implementation. It may be more creative and not actually rolling your sleeves up and getting busy with something. But by just moving people around a little bit, you discovered that actually you had talent. When I say talent, there was talent anyway, but you had energy and talent in certain positions where before you had one or the other, if you like. And it's interesting how sometimes, again, it's hidden. It's not hidden. It's right there. You just don't see what you have. And of course, personality, Matthew, going back to things like the Workplace Big Five, it does give you an idea of where people have a reserve, a battery pack for certain things and not other things. And yet we still play people out of position. That's the phrase, if you like, in the soccer team. Mm-hmm. And we don't learn from that. And ourselves, we try and play in a position that we're not maybe have the right energy for. We're depleted.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's also this, if we're encouraging people to step out of their comfort zone, maybe move sideways in an organization, or maybe take on the responsibility of the project that Rick's been talking about. And that's not their normal modus operandi, but we're encouraging to do that. Then we have to, as leaders and as organizations, accept that they're going to feel uncomfortable, they're going to make mistakes, but crucially, their energy level is also going to be seriously impacted. So we need to be finding support rather than sort of telling them to go off and do great things and then just leaving them to sort of to find their own way. I mean, I remember just a few years ago now doing a lot of work with they're actually a finance services company, but when I joined the business to help them, there were 300 people, of which 280 of them were IT experts. They were specialists at looking at computer screens and doing data crunching. And the owners of the business came to me and said, Matthew, I don't understand. We've got this we're growing the business massively well. We're very profitable, but we're useless at looking after people. We haven't got a clue how people are feeling and thinking. So we used this particular assessment. I pulled off the reports and I presented it back to the management board. And I said, and I was worried because the report basically said, these people have no energy for doing anything you're asking them to do. Their tank is completely empty. They haven't even brought a Duff battery into the room with them. They've got no power pack at all. And the management team looked at it and said, well, what do you think we ought to do? Because we're going to expand the business by 3 or 4 times the size it is now. And I said, well, you need to employ people who aren't IT experts, but who enjoy working with people and making sure they're okay and, doing all the general stuff. And they started to do that. And they're now a business of about 5,000 employees rather than 2 or 3 million. They employed a lot of people who didn't know much about IT systems, but were really good at leading people and managing them and coaching them and all the stuff that these other people didn't like. And I just think, we do this. It's back to energy again. What floats your boat? What encourages you to bring an enormous battery pack into the room with you, metaphorically speaking? Yeah. And then what does it take to drain the battery, and what does it take to keep the battery charged up? And you mentioned the Zappo experience and the perception that people have got some control over what they do, the perception that there is progress in what's going on. That to me sounds like things that charge up people's batteries. Absolutely, that would be a classic example. So how do we get leadership to create those situations where people feel they are partly in control of what they're doing and contributing, and projects are moving forward with progress?
I First of all, the Zappos example is great, and by the way, you can find it on the internet. That's I think the 4 principles. And just real quick, I used to teach in Center for Creative Leadership and their leadership development program, and I would teach motivation and leadership. And this one time I thought, why start off with all these theories? I mean, I love these theories, by the way. And I said, look, would you just take a sheet of paper, everybody? Think about a job that you had sometime in your life that you loved, and that you actually loved going to work, you loved being there. So it wasn't, external things. And it could have been a job you had in high school or college. And then I would just say, so what did you come up with? And people invariably came up with the same things. And it had to do that my work mattered. I liked the team I was working with, that, that we counted on each other. I mean, and rarely did money come up as one of the key motivators. And so to try to address the question, that you just raised, Matthew, is I would say to leaders, okay, so that's true for you. This is going on for everybody in the organization too. They've got most of them have, maybe all of them have a picture of this is a good job. And if you strip that out and say, oh, but when we get done with this project, then we can do it, you're waiting way too long. And so it doesn't have to be it doesn't take a bunch of new skills. They don't need to, they don't need to read all the books that Rick Maurer wrote or anybody else or go to a bunch of training. It's like, look at that list that you created and take a look at what other people are saying. And are you doing that? And ask people, how do you do that? I mean, I don't hate to be simplistic. I really think it can be that simple, but also that fundamental, and, at any rate, so I got off let me put my soapbox over here and I'll get off.
No, get on it again. I mean, I'm conscious of time, and we've been going for about 35, 40 minutes now. So as we often finish these conversations, if you've got a couple of young leaders in front of you now, people just starting off, maybe they're running a small team, maybe they've just moved into a role with a couple of people reporting into them, what would be your fundamental piece of advice to them?
Okay. What I've been doing, and I actually put it at the beginning of the book now, and I've expanded a little bit, is I ask people, because all I focus on is how do you build support? How do you either work with resistance or avoid it? I'm a one-trick pony. It's a really nice pony, I think, but I don't do the other kinds of things. And I'll say, all right, scale of 1 to 5, how important is it going to be for you to build support for whatever the things are you're working on? 5 would be high. And if they say anything below a 4, I'll say, that may be fine, it may work for you, but I can't help you because that's not what I do. If you say a 3, well, like when it's convenient to involve people or engage people, that ain't good enough for most of us. It may work, but I can really help you with the other things. So I want to make sure we're a good fit. And then the question that gets people to kind of look away and kind of cough when I ask it, I'll go, scale of 1 to 5, how willing are you to be influenced by the people you're trying to influence? And I remember the first time I asked that, I was doing a presentation in Copenhagen, and people, honestly, they started laughing, that kind of nervous laugh, and I thought, okay, I'm on to something. But those 2 questions, for me, are mindset questions. And so if they say, yeah, it's important that we build support, and yes, it's important that I have a way to deal, to listen to other people and pay attention. If they say I have no skills in that area, that's perfectly fine with me. That's not a big deal. The mindset, if your mindset, like there used to be a guy who ran, I think, Sunbeam and another big company, and his name was Al Dunlap, and he had the name of Chainsaw Al because he just cut away people. It was not a pretty image. So if you work for, if he were still alive, he would not pick up my book and go, wow, what have I been missing all these years? He would go, what a bunch of crap this is. I mean, so if that's what you believe, I'm not an evangelist. I can't help the people who just see the world differently than I do.
Yeah.
If instead of reading, John Cotter and Peters and Waterman, they've been reading Machiavelli, that's, that's who they should be looking to, is Machiavelli and not a Rick Maurer. So
great. Well, Rick, it's been super having you live on this conversation and joining us sort of early morning in Washington. So thank you so much for agreeing to this session. And Tim, Britt, Ian, great to see you, and thanks for joining the conversation. We've got more to come. So if you've got any comments, if you want to challenge Rick on anything or anything you've heard, then please do so, because this is what it's all about. But for the moment, Rick, thanks very much indeed. And take care.
You're welcome. This is a real pleasure.
Thanks,
it's really good talking with all of you again. So
great. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Rick.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rick.
You're welcome.